Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here with the weekly news with the only man that can bring us the weekly news, Nick Bendel. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Owen. Always great to join you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything interesting been happening in your week this past week?
Well, I think you're talking to the wrong person. I'm a very boring person. I tend not to do interesting things. My life tends to be same. But having said that, part of the joy that I have and that you have also is we both run businesses, and it's really stimulating and enjoyable trying to build and grow a business. And I have a business which is called Hunter and Scribe. That's a copywriting agency that writes content for finance and property professionals throughout Australia. One of the things we're really good at, Owen, is writing award submissions. And I was just contacted by a mortgage broker who wants help entering 4 different categories in the Australian Broking Awards. So that's going to keep me busy for a
Wow.
while.
Sounds impressive. But nothing wrong with boring and monotonous, Nick. As they say, consistency is key, especially in business. So, yes, boring can be good sometimes.
Well, thank you. Boring
And
is beautiful, I like to think. What have you been up to over
yes,
the past week?
more boring things as well. Yeah, with property management and making sure that all of the repairs and maintenance issues are taken care of for our clients with their investment properties and renewing of leases and all those boring things in property management. But in the past week, we have been. I was introduced to a a sales agent based in Melbourne who is helping a lot of investors get into brand new house and land
Mm.
properties, mainly in Melbourne, but also across the country. And he's got many years' experience helping investors, and he's looking at working with us to be able to um, help these clients manage their investment properties down the track. So that's something that we work with, not just buyers agents and traditional sales agents, but also businesses that do brand new house and land, we talk about needing more supply in the
Mm.
market a lot. And a lot of that means building of new house and land and not just units and townhouses as well, or apartment buildings, but brand new house and land. We need a nice balance of all of the above. So, yeah.
Oh, very nice. I do agree with you. We definitely need a mix of housing options. And funnily enough, that is going to be one of our 3 stories that we've got coming up.
Oh, well, we can always bet on that subject coming up most weeks, can't we, Nick?
We can indeed. Are you ready for the first story?
Yes, give it to me, Nick. Let's get going. What's in the news this week?
Singles struggling in rental market. Inspired by Sex and the City, The Economist has created the Carrie Bradshaw Index, which measures rental affordability for single renters. The Carrie Bradshaw Index calculates the salary that a single person needs to afford a 1-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of their gross income on rent. In Sydney, you would need to earn at least $116,000 to avoid spending more than 30% of your income on rent. Brisbane is $92,000, Adelaide $90,000, Melbourne $85,000, Perth $82,000, and Canberra $78,000. Melbourne and Canberra are the only cities where median incomes exceed the Carrie Bradshaw wage. Owen, during your years as a property manager, have you noticed the problem of rental affordability getting worse?
Oh yes, very much so. And it was interesting to see this Carrie Bradshaw index. Coming from the show Sex and the City, a show that I put in my top 100 list of shows that I've watched in my life. And it was funny when I was in New York a couple of years ago for the first time, which was, one of the things we did was go and visit the steps of Carrie Bradshaw's apartment. It's very famous if you watch the show. I know you have, Nick. You've probably binged it a few times. But yes, it's very famous. They actually have a sign across the steps saying this is a private residence. Do not knock on the door. Blah blah blah. So yes, obviously it's a thing. I didn't realize I was one of those people. But to get back to your question. Yes, it's we have noticed the problem of rental affordability getting worse. A lot of singles wanting to now they're getting into smaller and smaller and smaller apartments. I remember 20 years ago, one bedroom apartments were pretty much non-existent. It was a minimum of two bedroom, and even two bedroom was like, geez, that's a small unit you've got there. What if you've got two kids, or God forbid, three? Uh, where do you fit them in? But it's now a thing where your one bedroom units are becoming fairly standard, especially in the larger cities like Sydney and Melbourne. And because there's a lot more singles and they're needing to be able to afford properties by themselves. So yes, it has got worse, and the size of the units that they're living in are becoming smaller as well.
Well, then let me jump to the obvious conclusion, Owen. If rents are too high, doesn't that mean we should introduce rent controls?
Well, define rent controls, I think the consensus from the ballot box from the recent federal election about rent controls was well and truly voted on with the Greens that were very hell-bent on rent controls being well and truly kicked out of the House of Representatives, the lower house in the federal parliament, and including the leader. Yeah, it's I think that was news in the last week that Adam Bandt lost his federal seat, and I heard he chucked a little bit of a tantrum, which you can quite easily picture as well. So it's quite obvious that rent controls are not the answer, because all they do is provide a disincentive for more supply to come into the market.
Okay, well, I was surprised to hear that you were a Sex and the City fan, but I'm not surprised to hear that you oppose rent controls. So then let me ask you this. Property investors get some tax benefits. There's negative gearing, that's capital gains tax discount, depreciation. But should the federal government provide further incentives to entice more investors into the market and increase rental supply?
I think we're at a point where we're fairly balanced. A lot of the depreciation benefits that the Hawke and Keating government in the 80s and 90s brought into effect with where the whole negative gearing concept really took off for property investment. And so since then, we've had the Howard and the Turnbull governments really wind back a lot of those depreciation benefits that really kicked a lot of incentives in the first 5 to 10 years to be able to give investors a big shot in the arm for affordability in those first 5 to 10 years. So a lot more investors are having to become a lot more savvy, focus on cash flow being produced from the property. And as a result, The market has changed. There's not as much of a focus on brand new properties. There's more of a focus on cash flow properties that are allowing the investor to be able to hold on to these properties for longer instead of relying on negative cash flow and relying on tax benefits to be able to pay for that.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the rental market, Owen. Now, for our next story, I did promise that we were going to talk about different forms of housing. So let me now fulfill that promise. South Australia introduces innovative housing model. South Australia has introduced new planning rules called the Future Living Code Amendment into 6 Adelaide councils in an attempt to create greater housing diversity and make it easier for homeowners to age in place. The Future Living Code Amendment aims to encourage owners and developers to convert houses into co-located housing rather than demolish, subdivide, and build something new. All the homes in a co-located development will be of similar status, rather than having a hierarchy of, say, a main house and a granny flat. Also, the existing home will be retained and the open space will be shared. The Future Living Code Amendment allows for shared features such as gardens, laundries, activity rooms, and car parks, which are designed to foster community. Each of the homes within a co-located housing development will be managed through community title and will be able to be bought and sold separately. So, Owen, what do you think of the idea of co-located housing?
It's to be honest, I had to look this up myself when I saw this story. I hadn't come across it, and it's certainly something different. And um, uh, does it actually provide more housing for the market? No, not necessarily. It's so from that point of view, it doesn't put more supply into the market. And does it maybe make it more affordable to be able to get into a property? You would expect the value of each property to come back some because there then becomes common area, and but then that would reduce the ongoing repairs and maintenance expenses for the property owner. And yes, it provides more common space that might have been unused previously by individual lot owners, that can then be shared by the common tenants or occupiers. So there's a lot of pros and cons. Interesting concept. Like a lot of these new concepts that come into the housing market, it's probably going to be a wait and see to see how it works. It sounds a lot like social housing projects that have been done in the past that have been big failures. But this could be different because it's not particularly just for social housing, and would allow a nice mix. So yes, it's good on them for trying to come up with something different, and maybe to preserve existing communities in the current form that they're in, and setting up different options to be able to allow for change in those communities at the same time without necessarily huge redevelopment.
I'm wondering what the property price impact will be. Given that about 2/3 of the market is owner-occupiers, owner-occupier demand has a much bigger influence on prices than investor demand. I'm wondering, would co-located housing appeal to the typical owner-occupier, Owen? And if not, does that mean co-located homes would experience lower capital growth than regular homes?
Um, Generally, when you look at a strated property or community titled property, in this instance, um, you're usually looking at lower expected capital growth over time. it's not as popular as having a Torrens title property, and it's so it would be, but this is a different kettle of fish, and usually with community title properties, there are less restrictions and less costs involved than a typical strated property, like in an apartment block, unit block, or a townhouse development.
Okay, well, let's look at the rental side of things. I'm wondering, would tenants prefer co-located housing to apartment living? And if so, could co-located housing experience stronger rental growth than apartments?
Possibly, because it could be a good mix where they're still getting a traditional house, and it's not this cookie cutter property that they're living in. So it might be an older property that might have been renovated, but it's still a traditional home in a traditional suburb. But so you've got all those benefits, but then you've got the benefits of all of the common area being looked after, and common area facilities being available to be able to use. So yes, interesting concept.
It is a very interesting concept. I was very intrigued when I heard about it, and I'm curious to know how this experiment or how this innovation goes, and whether South Australia rolls it out to other councils, and whether other states come up with similar ideas.
Mm.
Well, let's move on to our final story. Average parental gift now $74,000. The Bank of Mum and Dad is helping more Australians buy a home, and the money is getting more generous. According to Mozo, the average gift from parents now stands at $74,000. That's up from $70,000 in 2021. Unlike in previous years, most parents are not expecting to be repaid. 3 in 4 parents are now giving money outright, compared to just 1 in 3 in 2021. Mozo found that many parents are digging deep into savings or cutting expenses to help. And while the support can be a game changer for buyers, it also highlights how hard it is to enter the market without family backing. Owen, so a two-part question for you. Firstly, do you expect property prices to keep rising? And if so, do you expect the Bank of Mum and Dad to keep providing ever larger sums of money to buyers?
Yes. First question is yes, we would expect property prices to keep on rising due to the ever increasing demand of population growth and the ever decreasing, it seems like, supply in terms of keeping up with that demand.
Okay,
Do we
so
expect Bank of Mum and Dad to keep providing ever larger sums of money? Yes, they simply have to. Yeah, they provide more help than the federal government does in and state government in terms of help to be able to get into first home buyers, but they provide help for not just first home buyers. It might be people that have been in the market, couldn't stay in the market for whatever reason, and are trying to get back into the market, and their only help is with Bank of Mum and Dad. So it's maybe governments have missed an opportunity here to be able to help provide some incentives or benefits to Bank of Mum and Dad and their recipients to be able to help them get into the market rather than taxpayers footing the bill all the time.
okay, well then, if we do see more Bank of Mum and Dad activity in the years ahead, I guess we're going to see more emphasis on guarantor loans. Most banks already
Mm.
offer guarantor loans, but do you think banks will start focusing more on guarantor loans and perhaps fight with each other increasingly to offer the most enticing terms?
Yes, and it's not a new thing. It's been around for uh, a number of decades, and and I'm surprised it's not more of a topic in the industry. And I think that's where we can look at. the actual percentage of loans that are written, and the number of transactions that are first home buyer based, versus the rest of the market, and where the media and politics is forever focused on first home buyers, where the majority of the market are those second home buyers, selling and either downsizing or upsizing. So it's the banks don't make a big deal of it. A lot of them offer it, but it's not something that really makes market headlines.
Well, if bank of mum and dad activity does indeed keep rising, I'm wondering, I mean, do you think that would create two classes in our society? And to illustrate my point, let me run a scenario by you. If a 30-year-old today is given assistance from the bank of mum and dad to buy a property, then when they're 60 years old, they will have the equity to provide bank of mum and dad assistance to their child. But if there's another 60-year-old who was never able to buy a home because they never received bank of mum and dad assistance, they probably won't be able to help their children into a home. What are your thoughts about that kind of scenario?
Yes, but let's take a step backwards. There's not a huge portion of the market that that is providing bank of mum and dad loans or gifts to help their kids get into the property market. There's enough for it to be an option and a product and a policy with banks, but is it going to create a two classes in society? I don't think so.
Okay, well, we had a really nice mix of topics to discuss today. I always love
Yes.
hearing your thoughts. Thank you very much for that. And I look forward to chatting again next week.
All right. Thank you, Nick. And yes, always looking forward to what's in the news. See you next week.